September 12, 1940. A cramped, smoke-filled office deep within the Special Operations Executive, SOE, headquarters, Baker Street, London. The only sound is the frantic, rhythmic clacking of a dozen teleprinters and the hiss of an antiquated radiator trying and failing to fight off the autumnal chill. Captain Alistair "Ally" Graham, a man whose tailored tweed jacket looked perpetually out of place against the backdrop of wartime utility, tapped a pencil against a file marked F section, Prospective Recruits. His gaze was fixed on a grainy photograph of a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, almost serene expression. This was not the typical saboteur or radio operator they sought for occupied France. This was Hélène de Montfort, a renowned food columnist for a pre-war Parisian newspaper, known across the continent for her sophisticated yet accessible recipes and her popular Le Coin Gourmand column. "She's a chef, Graham, not a spy," Major Charles Beaumont grunted, pushing a tin of stale biscuits across the desk. "We need operatives who can blow up rail lines, not bake soufflés." Graham leaned forward, lowering his voice against the office din. "Major, the resistance network we're trying to establish in Lyon, Réseau Pêche, is shattered. Their radio operator was captured last week. The Gestapo is swarming the city. We need someone who can move, observe, and most importantly, transmit messages right under their noses without ever touching a wireless set or a piece of carbon paper. Hélène de Montfort has deep, legitimate cover. She still corresponds with her column's editors, who are now under Vichy control, and they still publish her pieces. If the Germans see her, she's merely a famous culinary exile, writing about the perfect crêpe Suzette." He paused, his eyes gleaming with the dangerous logic of the SOE. "We teach her to use those very recipes as a cipher. We make the Gestapo hungry for information, and we feed it to them, disguised as dessert." The stakes were impossibly high. Failure would mean the immediate execution of a beloved public figure and the collapse of a critical lifeline. Ally knew the risk, but the alternative, total silence, was unacceptable. The SOE was betting the war on ingenuity, and Hélène was their secret ingredient. Section 1. Recruitment and the Culinary Cipher. The recruitment of Hélène de Montfort was unlike any other in the clandestine world of F section. She was brought into a safe house in Surrey, not to be taught how to handle a Sten gun or assemble plastic explosive, but to transform her existing professional life into a highly effective espionage tool. Her instructor in cryptography was a wiry mathematics professor named Dr. Edmund Carter, whose mind saw patterns in everything from bird calls to the structure of a brioche. The method they devised was brilliant in its simplicity and maddening in its complexity. It hinged on her continued work, writing recipes for transmission to France. The culinary cipher, as Carter dubbed it, used the subtle variations and quantities in her ingredients, specifically common, non-rationed items, as a simple substitution code. The ingredients themselves were the key. For instance, the number of eggs called for might represent a letter block, or the weight of sugar could signify a date. Their basic message structure focused on the dosage and preparation. A recipe for tarte tatin became a vessel for intelligence. The volume of milk, measured in milliliters, converted to a grid reference, could pinpoint the location of a German convoy. The exact cooking time, a number of minutes, could be the designated time for a parachute drop. The number of apples, always specified for perfect presentation, could denote the number of high-value targets. A seemingly innocuous instruction, like "stir until the mixture is the color of pale moonlight," could signal a change in the resistance network's status, a warning of infiltration. Hélène, far from being just a writer, possessed a photographic memory and an almost scientific precision honed over years of perfecting French gastronomy. She grasped the system with chilling speed, practicing converting actual intelligence reports into harmless-sounding instructions for a mousse au chocolat. If I say 250 grams of finest granulated white sugar, it means radio operator captured. Use emergency channel 5, she calmly summarized during a late-night practice session, holding the gaze of the astonished Dr. Carter. Precisely, madame, Carter whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. But you must never, ever falter in the presentation. The recipe must be flawless, publishable. If the patisserie is poor, the Gestapo will assume sloppiness. If the message is flawed, the resistance dies. Helene nodded. Her life, and the lives of those she supported, was now tied to the perfect rise of a cake. Her mission was set. Infiltrate Lyon, link up with the remnants of Responsibly, and begin broadcasting their existence and their needs through her beloved food column, directly into the hands of a German-controlled press. The journey was perilous, the risk of interception catastrophic, but the need was critical. She packed a small bag containing only her passport, a few personal items, and a well-thumbed copy of Larousse Gastronomique, Section 2, Infiltration and the Scrutiny of Vichy. Hélène de Montfort crossed the border into Vichy, France, in early November 1940. Her cover story was flawless. A celebrated Parisian food writer seeking refuge and the ability to continue her work in the relative calm of Lyon, the culinary heartland. The city was thick with spies, collaborationists, and most dangerously, the brutal efficiency of the Sicherheitspolizei, SIPO, the German security police. She quickly established herself in a modest but respectable apartment near the Place des Jacobins, securing a legitimate contract with a local publishing house that managed her column's continuation. This contract was vital. It provided the official, authorized channel for her future transmissions. Her first challenge was re-establishing contact with the fractured réseau Pêche. She used a prearranged, passive signal, a carefully worded letter to a known resistance sympathizer, disguised as a request for rare local saffron. Within a week, she met her first contact, a nervous, middle-aged butcher named Antoine, the only surviving link to the previous network leader. The meeting took place in the refrigerated silence of his meat locker, the smell of cured ham masking their furtive whispers. Antoine was initially suspicious, terrified of the SOE's involvement, which often brought swift Gestapo retribution. Helene calmed him, not with assurances of victory, but with the specific technical details of the culinary cipher. She didn't talk about bombs. She talked about ingredients. The instruction for 3 tablespoons of fresh cream, whisked rigorously, indicates a priority need for 3,000 rounds of ammunition, she explained, the cold mist of the locker swirling around her face. The word rigorously tells London to drop the supplies on the moonless night following the publication. The preparation method is as important as the quantity. Antoine's eyes widened. This was safer than any radio they had ever used. It was invisible. The greatest hurdle, however, came from the Vichy censors and, indirectly, the occupying forces. The Germans, highly conscious of propaganda and morale, scrutinized all French publications. Helene's recipes, though seemingly harmless, attracted the notice of Hauptmann Klaus Richter, a German cultural attaché and keen amateur cook assigned to monitor French periodicals for anti-Reich sentiment. Richter wasn't looking for sabotage. He was looking for tone. He was concerned that Helene's articles, with their insistence on quality ingredients now subject to harsh rationing, might subtly undermine the sacrifices demanded by the new order. Richter personally demanded that all of Hélène's submissions be routed through his office first. This was a catastrophic development. Hélène was now transmitting intelligence directly into the hands of a German officer. Her first coded recipe, a seemingly straightforward preparation of gratin dauphinois, intended to confirm the resistance's new drop zone coordinates, sat on Richter's desk. Hélène knew that Richter's culinary scrutiny could accidentally uncover the cipher. If he corrected an ingredient quantity for accuracy or wartime appropriateness before publication, he would inadvertently alter and scramble the vital intelligence. She had to ensure the Gestapo's keen interest in French culture did not expose the espionage embedded in its food. Section 3. The German Gourmet and the Risotto of Lies. Hauptmann Richter was indeed an obstacle, but one Hélène realized she might be able to manage, perhaps even manipulate. Richter, a man of meticulous habit and intellectual pretension, loved French food almost as much as he loved efficiency. His greatest flaw was his vanity. He believed himself a superior culinary connoisseur. Hélène, through discreet inquiries and observations, learned Richter's preferences. He favored complexity, rarity, and precision in execution, qualities often difficult to achieve under wartime rationing. She began adjusting her recipes, not just for the cipher, but for Richter's ego. She made her encoded submissions deliberately opulent, using descriptions that flattered the superior taste of her intended audience of one. Her second major transmission was critical. A request for a new high-powered radio transmitter to be dropped near Grenoble. The message was concealed within a recipe for saffron risotto with morels, a dish that screamed expense and sophistication. The quantity of saffron, measured in exact pinches, coded the drop zone coordinates. The precise volume of chicken stock to the milliliter represented the call sign, and the instruction to fold in a rare, specific type of Parmesan cheese, its age denoting the day of the drop, was the final, crucial element. When the manuscript reached Richter's desk, he frowned. "Morels?" he muttered to his assistant, a collaborationist journalist named Dubois. Where would the average reader find morals in 1941? This is impractical, Madame de Montfort. Dubois started to reach for a pen, ready to substitute common mushrooms, but Richter stopped him. He reread the introduction, a brief, florid passage Hélène had added about how true French gastronomy could not be suppressed, and that the discerning palate would always find a way. "No, wait," Richter mused, tapping his pen on the ingredient list. "The inclusion of morels suggests a certain defiance, a refusal to succumb to mediocrity. And the exact specification of 2.75 liters of homemade stock, such precision, it speaks to the integrity of the French kitchen. Changing this would violate the artistic integrity of the dish." He smiled thinly. "I will not insult the taste of my countrymen by simplifying their cuisine." "Publish it exactly as written, Dubois. Just add a disclaimer that only those with access to superior ingredients should attempt the recipe." Hélène had won the exchange by appealing directly to the Hauptmann's vanity and cultural snobbery. Richter saw her as a fellow guardian of European high culture, not an agent sending a radio request. The recipe was published, the cipher successfully transmitted, and 3 nights later, a British Whitley bomber, flying impossibly low over the Alps, delivered the transmitter to the resistance cell in Grenoble. Guided by a culinary instruction set that originated right under the Gestapo's nose, the risotto of lies had secured a vital lifeline for the resistance. Section 4. The pressure cooker and the perfect crepe. As 1941 turned into 1942, Hélène de Montfort became the most valuable single operative in the Southern Zone. Her published columns, appearing reliably every fortnight, were the heartbeat of the resistance, transmitting everything from details of troop movements in Marseille, coded in a recipe for bouillabaisse, to plans for sabotage near Toulon, hidden in the preparation of a pissaladière. London was delighted. The sheer volume and consistency of her intelligence were unprecedented for a non-radio agent. However, the pressure on Hélène was immense. The demands of the resistance grew, requiring ever more complex and specific data, stretching the limits of the simple substitution cipher. She was constantly running meetings in safe houses and market stalls, gathering raw intelligence, and then having to translate tank serial numbers or fuel dump locations into the language of flour, butter, and spice, all while maintaining the illusion of a world-weary but elegant food writer struggling with wartime shortages. The German scrutiny intensified. While Hauptmann Richter continued to monitor the tone of her work, the Gestapo, under the ruthless command of Obersturmführer Erich Voss, began to examine the patterns of her life. Voss was a sadist and a pragmatist. He didn't care about culture, only results. He noticed that the frequency of Hélène's column seemed to correlate suspiciously with certain British air activity in the free zone. The breaking point came with a critical message that had to be sent immediately: the detailed schedule of a planned raid by the Wehrmacht against a major Maquis stronghold in the Verkers Mountains. Hélène received the intelligence, a sheaf of hastily copied travel documents, on a Tuesday. Her column was due for transmission by Wednesday morning. She had less than 12 hours to compose a flawless, publishable recipe that contained the date, time, troop strength, and attack vectors. She chose crêpes Suzette. The recipe required high precision and multiple ingredients, offering ample cipher space. The temperature of the frying pan, converted to Celsius, coded the time of attack. The number of times the crêpe was folded and plated indicated the specific Maquis location. The use of precisely 33 grams of sugar for the sauce was the key marker for the troop strength: 3 battalions. Just as she finished the manuscript, there was a heavy, insistent knock on her apartment door. It was Obersturmführer Voss, accompanied by 2 menacing SIPO agents in long leather coats. "Madame de Montfort," Voss's voice was slick, devoid of Richter's polite pretense. "We received an anonymous tip that you are hoarding rationed goods. We must conduct a search." Hélène's heart hammered against her ribs. The coded manuscript lay on the kitchen table, covered only by a linen napkin. The smell of oranges, a key flavor in the Suzette sauce, hung heavy in the air. She knew Voss wasn't after butter, he was after her. She had seconds to act. Section 5. The test of the palate and the bitter orange. Hélène de Montfort turned from the door, her movements slow and deliberate, adopting the air of a woman inconvenienced by vulgarity. "Rationed goods, Obersturmführer?" she questioned, her voice carrying a tremor of indignation, not fear. "My dear sir, I am a professional culinary artist. I secure my necessary ingredients through legal means. But please come in. I was just finalizing a recipe for crêpes Suzette, a dish that requires absolute precision." She walked calmly toward the kitchen table, the 2 SIPO agents following her every move, their heavy boots scuffing the polished wood floor. She reached the table and, with a casual gesture, picked up the linen napkin covering the manuscript. Instead of hiding it, she used it to wipe a minuscule smear of orange juice from the table's edge. She then lifted the manuscript itself. "The manuscript is right here," Hélène stated, offering the loose sheets to Voss. "Feel free to inspect it. The ingredients are listed. You will note the precision required. For instance, the use of 33 grams of sugar to achieve the perfect caramelization and the exact temperature needed to infuse the Cointreau. One cannot rush art." Voss, momentarily thrown by her brazen offer, took the sheets. He was searching for lists of explosives, radio frequencies, or maps, not an instruction set for dessert. He quickly scanned the paper, his eyes catching the specific measurement of 33 grams, a seemingly odd, non-rounded number. It was suspicious. "Why 33 grams, madam?" Voss pressed, his eyes narrowing, his instincts screaming that this woman was too composed. "Why not 30? Or 35? Helene offered a slight, pitying smile, a look that suggested Voss was missing the point of life itself. "Ah, Obersturmführer, you ask the question of a barbarian, not a connoisseur. 30 grams would make the sauce flat, overly acidic from the orange juice. 35 grams would result in a cloying sweetness that destroys the delicate balance. 33 grams provides the juste milieu, the perfect equilibrium of bitter and sweet. It is the core of the dish, the point where flavor ceases to be mere food and becomes a poem." As she spoke, she simultaneously moved to her small stovetop where a delicate orange sauce was simmering. The other two agents began rooting through her cupboards, looking for caches of illegal ham or butter. Helene picked up a spoon, dipped it into the sauce, and with breathtaking confidence, extended it toward Voss. "Taste it, Obersturmführer," she commanded softly. "Taste the 33 grams. You will understand that the precision is about flavor, not espionage." Voss hesitated. He despised this kind of French theatricality, yet he prided himself on his self-control. He took the spoon, lifted the bitter-sweet sauce to his lips, and swallowed. For a fraction of a second, the complexity of the flavor held him. Helene had risked everything on the power of a perfect recipe to mask the truth of the cipher. The sauce, the heart of the message, was flawless. Voss handed back the manuscript, a grimace settling over his features. He couldn't prove it was code, he could only prove it was an excellent recipe. He found nothing incriminating in the apartment, only a well-stocked pantry. The Krebs Suzette cipher, containing the vital intelligence for the Werker's Maquis, was published the next day, right on schedule. Voss left, thwarted by a perfectly balanced caramel sauce, but certain he would return. Section 6. The Betrayal and the Recipe for Disaster. The successful transmission of the Werker's intelligence saved hundreds of resistance fighters. But it sealed Helene's fate. Voss, humiliated and furious, redirected his entire intelligence apparatus to monitor her life. He reasoned that the precision of her publications must be deliberate, even if he couldn't crack the method. He began to look not for codes in the text, but for unusual contact patterns in her daily life. By late 1942, the sheer strain of constant surveillance and operational demands began to take its toll on the réseau Pêche. Antoine, the butcher, under intense, sustained interrogation by the Gestapo, following a related network's collapse, finally broke. He did not know the specifics of the cipher, but he confessed that the famous columnist Helene de Montfort was the network's key source of communication with London. Voss was ecstatic. He had the target. Now he just needed the evidence. He allowed Antoine to be released, hoping he would lead the Gestapo directly to Helene's next high-value contact. Helene, sensing the air growing thin around her, prepared her most dangerous transmission yet. A final, massive intelligence package detailing the complete German anti-partisan troop deployment across the Rhone Valley. She disguised it as a complex, three-part article, a recipe for a grand Christmas terrine of foisie pain gras, scheduled for publication just before the holidays. The terrine, requiring intricate layering and specific chilling times, held the key to deciphering the entire operation. But before she could send the final part, Antoine, haggard and shadowed, appeared at her apartment door, claiming to need help with his son's baptism plans. A prearranged distress signal. Helene knew he was compromised. His eyes screamed it, but she had to maintain her cover. She invited him in for coffee, but kept the final, sensitive draft of the terrine recipe hidden in a loose floorboard beneath her kitchen stove. Voss, waiting a block away in an unmarked Opel Blitz, watched Antoine enter and exit Hélène's apartment less than 30 minutes later. Voss now had confirmation. He wasn't going to wait for a search warrant. He ordered his men to move in. Hélène was alone in the kitchen, preparing the final steps of the terrine. She heard the sound of screeching tires and heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. She knew this was the end. Her priority was not escape, but destruction of the code key and the transmission of a final, crucial warning. She grabbed the hidden recipe manuscript. Instead of trying to burn the whole thing, she focused on the single, most critical component. The section detailing the exact, coded measurements of cognac and Madeira required to bind the terrine, which served as the variable key for London to decode the deployment data. She tore off that specific section, threw it into the simmering cognac reduction on the stove, and watched the paper dissolve instantly into an illegible pulp of parchment and liqueur. The message was now safe from German eyes. But the rest of the unpublished terrine recipe remained. Hélène had ensured that London could decode the previous week's transmissions, but she had lost her ability to send the vital final warning to them. The door crashed inward. Section 7. The final serving and the legacy of the kitchen. Obersturmführer Voss stood silhouetted in the doorway. His Walther P-38 drawn, the cold steel reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. 2 SIPO agents immediately secured the room. Voss surveyed the scene. Hélène standing perfectly still next to the stove, the air thick with the scent of rich game and expensive alcohol, and a half-finished manuscript lying on the butcher block. "No escape this time, Madame la Cuisinière," Voss sneered, walking slowly toward her. He saw the shimmering, alcoholic puddle on the stove and the small puff of acrid steam rising from it. What was that? A final flourish? Hélène looked at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and absolute defiance. "It was the destruction of spoiled ingredients, Obersturmführer. I abhor waste." She did not resist as the agent seized her arms. Voss ignored her, grabbing the remaining pages of the manuscript, the elaborate instructions for the Christmas terrine, and scanning them, looking for the telltale numbers. He saw the complex steps, the precise layering, the instructions for sealing the crust with a specific thickness of lard. It was all there, a dense, technical guide to an opulent dish. But without the key measurements Hélène had destroyed, it was useless as a cipher to him. "You are under arrest for espionage and aiding the enemies of the Reich," Voss announced formally. Hélène was dragged out of her apartment, past her neighbor's curious stares, and into the waiting vehicle. She endured weeks of brutal interrogation in Montluc prison, but she never once mentioned the culinary cipher. Voss was convinced the code lay in the ingredients, but he couldn't crack the mathematical complexity of a shifting key based on preparation method. Hélène's insistence that she was merely a chef defending the integrity of French cuisine never wavered. Despite her capture, the impact of her espionage was profound. London, receiving the previous week's transmission, the details of the foie gras preparation, successfully decoded the full troop deployment before Hélène's arrest. The resistance, receiving the warning just days before the planned operation, melted away into the countryside, avoiding a catastrophic German sweep. Her final act of destroying the variable key ensured that even if Voss executed her, the system itself was secure. Hélène de Montfort was executed by the Gestapo in the spring of 1943. She was never publicly known as a spy. The Germans simply announced the execution of a notorious black marketeer. Her legacy remained hidden, protected by the very banality of her method. For years after the war, British intelligence agents would occasionally smile wryly when they ordered a perfect crêpe Suzette in Paris, knowing that in the darkest days of the occupation, a woman used flour, sugar, and the language of love, the language of food, to fight the war. She remains one of the most ingenious, yet forgotten, operatives of the Special Operations Executive. A culinary soldier who proved that even the most exquisite recipes could carry the most dangerous secrets. Her columns, still occasionally reprinted, stand as monuments to her silent, delicious victory.